Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Books and Mortar with me, your host, Rizia, where we talk about the books that build us. So, this episode is about Empire of the Damned by Jay Kristoff. I don't know if you heard of Jay Kristoff, but he's actually one of my favorite fantasy authors. And the lovely thing about fantasy books is that most of them are a series. So that's a lovely thing, and it's also not such a great thing. But it makes it difficult to review when you're now reading the second book in a series and you haven't reviewed the first because you read it so long ago. So here's my attempt anyway. The first book in this series is called Empire of the Vampire. And Jay Kristoff became very popular with his Nevernight trilogy, which was just epic, by the way. And this is his second big fantasy series, I would say. So, fair warning, if you're a sensitive person, do not read his books. They are also not for children. There's violence, so much violence. There's swearing, albeit in very creative ways. I must say, he swears in ways that I've never heard before. And it's so inspiring to read because it's just so different, you know. So his books has been described as smutty, but in my opinion, he has enough story in between. You know, there's like some books that just really overdo it, and that's all it is. But Jay Kristoff has story. He's got content as well, right? And I'd say that maybe Nevernight is like a touch more smutty than Empire of the Vampire and Empire of the Damned as well. I don't know, maybe. If you've read Nevernight, then maybe let me know what you think. All right, so I have to give you a summary of Empire of the Vampire before I start talking about Empire of the Damned. If you haven't read it, I really recommend that you do read it. It's like probably about an 800-page book. Yeah, fantasy authors are like really into size and volume for some reason. I don't know why, to be honest. I really don't. But I feel like they're competing with each other to see who can publish the thickest book. But anyway, so to give you a summary now of Empire of the Vampire, right? It's 27 years after Daysdeath, where the world is like in perpetual darkness and vampires rule the earth. So there's still day and night, but like I don't think that there's much of a difference between the light levels. So the story follows Gabriel de Leon, who is the greatest swordsman of all time. He's the wielder of Ash Drinker, and he's the main character, and he's being held prisoner by the Chastain vampire family because he killed another vampire named Fabian Voss, who was like this really, really powerful vampire. But he's ordered to tell the historian of the Chastains his life story before he is to be executed. So Gabriel is what is called a pale blood. He's half mortal and he's half vampire. So this means that like he still gets the urge to drink blood, but how does he fight it, eh? Because of what he is, he enters this group called the Order of San Michon, or the Silver Saints, who are a group of vampire hunters, and all of them are pale bloods. Like, ironic, right? So they've taken a vow to protect the church and its sanctity from the unholiness that is vampires, and of course a vow of celibacy comes with it, because honestly, when does it not, right? Gabriel quickly rises up the ranks in San Michon, and he makes quite the name for himself. So a defining feature of the Silver Saints is that they have these tattoos inked on their bodies in silver, and it's called their Aegis, and it burns brightly in the presence of vampires, rendering them weak because they're vulnerable to silver. So there's 4 major vampire bloodlines that you need to know in these books. It's the Voss, the Divok, the Chastain, and Elon, and each of them are known for different powers. Like, for example, the Divok are known for their incredible strength. The Voss are known for like their ability to enter your mind and like influence your thoughts. So that's what I mean. So Gabriel finds that he actually belongs to a 5th and largely forgotten line called the Esani, when he finds that he possesses blood magic or sanguimancy. So his entire family, when he was young, was actually killed by a vampire named Laura Voss, and he's sworn to get his revenge for them. So also in the San Michon compound of the Silver Sisterhood, because obviously, right, the best thing to have in an order where all the males are celibate is women. So Astrid and Gabe, so Gabriel, sorry, becomes friends with Astrid and Chloe, two silver sisters, and they come across information that the Holy Grail will be able to destroy Daysdeath and bring about an end to the vampires. So Astrid and Gabe take a liking to each other because, obviously. And eventually she becomes pregnant, and that means his expulsion from the order. But never mind, they get married and they have a lovely daughter named Patience, and then she and Astrid are eventually brutally killed by Fabian Voss as revenge on Gabe for killing his daughter Laura Voss. So this is not a spoiler. I mean, this is how the book starts. We all know that his family's been killed, and he was on his revenge journey. So this is his background in the order. Once he leaves, he's pretty much retired. But he has to abandon his retirement 11 years later. He's incredibly bitter. He's really angry because of what happened to his wife and daughter, of course. And this is something that's always with him, right? And it's always on his mind, and it's what fuels his thirst for revenge against Fabian Voss and just his general hatred for all things vampire. And did I mention that Astrid is now a vampire? Jeez, talk about complicated. So on his travels, he meets his old friend Chloe, who was one of the Silver Sisters, who is traveling to San Michon, and she's in the company of a youngster named Dior Lachance, who is supposedly a direct descendant of the Holy Redeemer, making her the Holy Grail. So being the Grail, her blood is actually able to kill vampires. It turns them to ash. But it can also heal injuries of mortals, which is, pretty useful. So Chloe and her party are being pursued by a Voss vampire and another masked vampire named Liath or Liath. These names, And she asks Gabe if he will come along to offer his protection, and he's like, yeah, all right. So when they get to San Michon, Gabe realizes that Chloe actually means to sacrifice Dior, to kill her, to end Daysdeath and fulfill the prophecy. And I think because of his daughter, right, he can't bear the idea of another child being killed, and he tries to stop them, but they slit his throat and throw him off a cliff, so kind of makes it hard, right? So it's very difficult to kill a Silver Saint. And he is saved by the mysterious masked vampire who reveals herself eventually to be his half-sister, who was turned by Laura Voss. So she saves his life actually by giving him her blood to drink, and to save Dior, Gabriel then goes and he kills Chloe and a whole lot of Silver Saints, many of whom were his friends during his days there. So you can imagine they're not happy with him, right? So this entire story is narrated by Gabriel to Jean-Francois Chastain, the historian, who then makes a note of everything and draws some beautiful pictures, which are also in the book. And this takes place over a day, right? So as does the story in the second book. So the entire narration takes place over one day. So book 1 and book 2 then span a duration of 2 days, which I actually thought was quite interesting, right? It was a fantastic book. I loved Empire of the Vampire. It was so good. Even though it was so thick and so big, I actually finished it quite quickly. It's about, finding lost faith, your found family, love, and friendship. And Gabriel is the main focus. And he's an amazing anti-hero, with his friends being the hill he dies on. I honestly never thought that I would read a vampire book after all of the cringy vampire stories out there. But because I enjoyed Nevernight so much, I thought I would then give this one a try because it's also Jay Kristoff. Okay, so that's pretty much Empire of the Vampire. You're caught up now. So let me read you the blurb on the back of Empire of the Damned. So Gabriel de Leon has saved the Holy Grail from death, but his chance to end the endless night is lost. After turning his back on his Silver Saint brothers once and for all, Gabriel and the Grail set out to learn the truth of how Daysdeath might finally be undone. But the last Silver Saint faces peril within and without, pursued by children of the forever king, drawn into wars and webs centuries in the weaving, and ravaged by his own rising bloodlust. Gabriel may not survive to see the truth of the Grail revealed, a truth that may be too awful for any to imagine. So yikes. So Gabriel is still imprisoned by the Chastain. I think it's maybe Chastain because it's French. And he is continuing his story with Jean-Francois now the next day. So I think there's some kind of a strange bond that's actually developed between the two of them now, between vampire and vampire hunter. I don't know how sincere it is, but they seem to have a good rapport, and Jean-Francois doesn't seem as bloodthirsty as other vampires. He seems more of an academic and an artist. So the Chastain line pride themselves like on their sophistication and their elegance, but I imagine that if they were provoked, they would behave as any other vampire. And as Gabe says, there's no one more afraid of dying than things who live forever. So he tells Jean-Francois that for all their pretty faces and beautiful speech, they all beg for their lives in the end and they all die like dogs. Jeez. So Gabriel picks up his story with him still traveling with Dior, the Holy Grail, but now they're accompanied by his sister, right? The vampire whose name is Celine Castia. And she hates him, right? So she blames him completely for her being turned into a vampire and forever being stuck in her 15-year-old body. So she's very powerful though, and she possesses, like Gabe, the power of sanguimancy, which makes her of the Isani as well. So Celine, though, seems to have her own plans for the Grail, and her and Gabe cannot agree on anything. So we now have an additional voice to Gabriel's story, and it's his sister, Celine. And I think it was a good thing that he varied it a little bit because it's nice to have that bit of diversity in the storytelling, right? So Celine, we come to know, has also been imprisoned by the Chastain, but her security level is like much higher. And she scares the heck out of our little historian, Jean-Francois. So her style of storytelling is much more matter-of-fact compared to Dear Gabe's, who is no doubt much more entertaining with his colorful descriptions and his more emotional voice. I suppose like that is expected since Celine is like technically dead. And of course, they insist that the other is lying about everything and that they cannot be trusted. So the main plot line starts at Saint-Michon after the massacre to save Dior. So essentially where the first book ended. So honestly, this is very much a middle book, right? There's like 700 pages in this book and there's not a lot that actually happens. So there's no plot really that moves forward here. It takes a very long time to move forward the plot of the story. And all of this, in my opinion, really happens like in the last 5% of the book. So the remaining 95% is incredible like imagery and character development. But I felt that at times it felt a little bit repetitive. I still enjoyed the book though, but I felt like maybe 700 pages wasn't necessary here. So the points of view, they switch between Gabe and Celine, and their story focuses on their time with the Grail, a lot of which happens on their travels. So Celine wants to take Dior to someone named Master Genoa because, let's be honest, Gabriel has no idea how to end Daysdeath, even with the Holy Grail at his side. So they argue as siblings who have caused the other to become a vampire do. But he grudgingly agrees, reminding her, as he does countless times through the book, that he will kill anyone who tries to hurt Dior. And it's like, dude, we know, okay? And so he comes to see Dior as a daughter, though, which is very sweet. And given how his actual daughter died, I really have no doubts as to the lengths he would go to protect Dior, right? So he tells Celine, hear me now. If the legions of heaven stood between me and that girl, I would slay every angel in the host to get back to her side. She and I have walked through hell together. I will never leave her. You hear me? And I would never hurt her. This is repeated like often throughout the book. So anyway, off they go, right? So don't be fooled, right? For someone who is the Holy Grail, Dior is not like especially holy in a sense. She swears like a sailor and she spent most of her life pretending to be a boy. Because growing up on the streets as she did, it's easier for boys than it is for girls. What she does have, though, is this unwavering sense of morality. She really is this burning light in the darkness of the world and someone who is determined to save everyone if she can. And she maintains her humanity in spite of everything that is happening. And it is grim with a capital G. Everything goes wrong for this group, like all the time. Even when you think something is going right, nope, the bubble eventually bursts. And not just bursts, but it is obliterated to the point where you never think you could produce a bubble like ever again. So on their travels, they encounter a fair few vampires of varying strengths, but like mostly the weaker ones who have just been turned and are not part of any major family line. So during the first encounter, we meet Gabe's old apprentice named Lachlan, or Lachy. So Ash Drinker calls him Pretty One. and he accompanies Gabe and Dior. Celine kind of like comes and goes, and Gabe is nervous for when she does arrive because then you'll have to explain her to Lucky, who, remember, is also a vampire hunter. So Lucky goes along with him at this point because he has no idea what's happened at San Michon, and Gabe obviously doesn't volunteer the information because he's happy having Lachlan with him. So all through the book, Gabriel's bloodlust is building and he's struggling to maintain control over it. So at San Michon, they're told that eventually the bloodlust will overcome them, but they are actually expected to kill themselves before this happens because better to die a man than to live to become a monster. I mean, like, I get the idea behind it, but wow, it's intense, eh? So to keep the bloodlust at bay, they smoke Sanctus, which is pretty much like blood in powdered form. But even this is not really enough to sate him nowadays, and neither is the alcohol that he keeps chugging at like every possible opportunity. So this, together with the constant thoughts of his wife and daughter, Gabriel is like a very unstable character, right? And it's just his relationship with Dior that keeps him from falling to pieces and honestly probably killing himself so that he can be with his beloved family. So the major vampire foe in this book are the Divok. So they are known for their incredible strength, and the trio meet some of them on their travels. So Kiara, the wolf mother, and Cain and Ricard, who they meet first. So they are descended from the Divok, Priori and his sister, who are Nikita and Lilith Divok. They are deplorable. I don't know that there is an adjective strong enough to describe how sickening they are. If you are of sensitive mind and stomach, like, please don't read this book. Some of the imagery is truly disturbing, and Kristoff does not pull punches. The Divok run slaughterhouses, human slaughterhouses. They are vampires, so you can imagine, right? Considering that vampires feed on people, I'd say that you could perhaps imagine the rest, but you really can't. So don't even try. So Celine appears to help them fight Kiara, Cain, and Ricard. And the thing about Celine is that she sees vampires as abominations. So unholy things that need to be raised from the earth. And even stranger, she feeds on them. So she's of an order of vampire that feeds on others and then stores their souls, so that when she dies, she will take all of their souls with them. That's why she refers to herself as we, because she's carrying like all of those other souls inside her. So during the same encounter, another savior appears in the form of a lion, who turns out to be none other than Phoebe, a dusk dancer or a shape changer, who we thought dead in the first book. So while she was very much a side character in Empire of the Vampire, Phoebe's character really develops beautifully in this one. So the Silver Saints were raised to believe that dusk dancers were the enemy and vice versa. So they really have to learn to trust each other now to protect Dior, because Phoebe pledges her life to her essentially. So the major thing during the encounter is that the Divok are traveling with a wagon full of children who they captured at the last village that they decimated, and Dior is determined to save them. So this girl has like no powers to speak of, and she can't fight worth a damn, but she is determined to save these kids, and she does. So this, of course, like, serves to show you Dior's character, right? And they take the kids with them for a while, and eventually Lachlan splits off with him to take them to San Michon. And this makes Gabriel a bit nervous because you know what he's going to find there, right? So there's a lot of quoting from scripture by the different characters, especially Celine and Gabriel, and who's something of an agnostic. He doesn't believe that God listens to him, or that he grants anyone any favors, obviously because of the things that have happened to him, right? But it's interesting because eventually there's nothing more that Gabriel can do but put his trust in God, and that's obviously very, very difficult for him. His faith has been shattered, I think, so many times that it's been difficult for him to put it back together. So they reach their destination of Master Genoa's church, but the guy's dead and there's no one there. So with some of the vast vampires on their trail after Dior, they really can't afford to linger anywhere too long. They do find out something interesting though. The whole idea of the Holy Grail ending Daysdeath came from a prophecy that's quoted many times throughout the book, right? And it goes like this. From holy cup comes holy light, the faithful hand sets world aright, and in the 7 martyrs' sight, mere man shall end this endless night. But there's apparently more to this prophecy, right? And they didn't have any idea until now. But they were actually only able to read the last line in the aging book. And the last line goes, "This blackened veil shall be undone." But of course, they need the middle bit as well. And the hope is that they will better understand what it is Dior needs to do to end Daysdeath. So while they're here, they're again attacked by a horde of vampires. The Voss, this time to get revenge on Dior for killing their brother Danton, which happens in book 1. But before the battle starts, there's a part where Gabriel is actually teaching Dior about chess. And it was quite interesting. So it goes like this. "This is the Emperor," I declared, "the most important piece on the board. He can attack any direction he pleases, but he can't move far. So he tends to stand here at the back of the line, commanding the rest of these pieces to do his will. Perhaps these little bastards will be more familiar to one of your colorful upbringing then." I nudged a smaller piece with my boot, a row of them, waist height, fashioned like infantry in archaic armor. "The peon, they're the front line of your army. Cheap, expendable. They open the board up for the rest of your pieces to really play. This here is Chateau. This one is Chevalier. And this is Pontifex, Church and State. They move in different ways, but their task is the same. Go out onto the battlefield and inflict carnage in the Emperor's name. They're your specialist pieces. You protect them if you can, but in the end you can lose them all and still win the game." I demonstrated the method of moving each piece, lifting them easily with a dark strength in my veins. It occurred to me this was a set that only cold bloods were truly meant to play with, that Dior would struggle to move them by herself. But still she watched on now, blue eyes shining as she dragged on her smoke, her natural curiosity blossoming. "What about that one?" she asked, breathing grey. "This is the Empress," I patted the piece she nodded to. "The power behind your throne. She moves as far as she pleases in any direction she likes. She's your executioner, your red right hand. Swift, versatile, deadly." Dior smiled. "I like her. Don't get too attached. In the end, she's just as expendable as the rest." The girl frowned. "Why? She sounds the strongest piece on the board." "She's not." I tapped the Dark Emperor's shoulder again. "He is. The object of the game is to capture your opponent's emperor. In the end, nothing else matters." "That's foolish. He can't do half of what these other pieces do." "He does what none of them can do. He wins you the game." "That's not fair. Fair is for dead men and losers, Dior." "But it makes no sense," she scowled, breathing grey from her nostrils. "How can the coward who doesn't fight be the difference between winning and losing?" "The Emperor does fight, if he's forced to. And when he does, like any good leader, he can swing battle's tide. But you don't risk your most valuable piece on the front line, not when all these other pieces are willing to fight for him. Not when losing him means losing the game. That's not just foolish, that's suicide." So dear old Gabe is obviously trying to impart a lesson here, right? Dior wants to fight with him against the Voss, and he's telling her that she is too valuable to risk as the Holy Grail, right? But of course she feels, how can she allow others to risk themselves and die for her while she stays safe? The usual story. So throughout the book, though they call Gabriel Chevalier, which means knight. Isn't that a lovely word? I mean, it just sounds so nice, right? Chevalier, my goodness. So, all right, so then we carry on here. "Enough people have died on my account already," she shouted, because, she's obviously caught on to what Gabriel is trying to do and what he's trying to tell her. "Aaron, Baptiste, Rafa, Saoirse, Belle, I'm not just going to sit by while you give your life for me too, Gabriel. I know you won't, but that's my point. He doesn't matter." With unholy strength, I hurled the Chevalier across the room, Dior flinching as it shattered against the wall. "These don't matter." One by one, I lifted the beautiful pieces, dark and bright, peon and chateau and empress, smashing and hurling them aside. None of them, until only 2 pieces remained. And chest heaving, I lifted the dark emperor over my head and with a roar brought it down at the bright emperor's feet with all my strength. The flagstones shattered like glass, a hollow boom echoed among the gables. The dark emperor broke into a dozen pieces, dust and fragments spilling across the smashed tiles. The room was deathly silent as I turned to Dior, chest heaving, fangs bared. "Victory," I hissed, "over the darkness, over him. That's what matters, Dior." She held my stare a moment, then looked to the floor. The once beautiful pieces were scattered, fallen on their sides, splintered and broken. The girl shook her head, pale blue gaze drifting over the bright emperor standing alone on the ruined and broken field. Gabriel, if this is victory, what the hell does defeat look like? I respect Dior immensely for this. What is the point of winning if you, the emperor, are left standing alone on the board, all of your comrades literally shattered to pieces around you? What kind of victory is that, you know? It shows her softness and her empathy for others, even in a world that would show her none in return. And of course, it irks Gabriel to no end. Even him, though, like, he's a tough nut, but he's really soft on the inside. And his relationship with Dior is proof of that. The fact that he hurts is proof of that. So I'm not going to go into the battle in too much detail, but Kristoff writes these really well. His descriptions of battle are like truly inspired, and I don't generally like reading battle scenes, but his are quite well done. At the end of it, we see the diver catching up to them, and we learn that the different vampire lines are like none too friendly with each other. And then Celine drops Gabriel off a cliff. So I don't imagine that this helps matters between them. But don't panic. We know that he doesn't die because he's sitting there in his cell telling Jean-Francois the story, so he's obviously alive. So this is the point, though, where Gabriel and Dior's paths diverge, and the historian then moves down to Celine's cell, which is separated from him by like an underground river, because vampires cannot cross moving water. But even though there's a river between them and he knows that she can't cross, he's still afraid of her, because she's like immensely powerful. And I was a bit weary, though, to read Celine's narration because she has like a very formal and dry manner of speaking, and I was worried it would be a little bit boring. It wasn't nearly as entertaining as Gabe, but it wasn't boring either. So she justifies dropping him off a cliff by saying that he deserved it for letting her become a vampire. I mean, understandable, right? And she felt that she was better off without his interference. But before she can run off with Dior, Chiara pulls Celine's arms out of her body, right? And she sets her on fire. And this is like one of the milder incidents, right? So that is the other vulnerability of the vampire, fire. And the other one was silver, right? And so Celine burns. And Jean-Francois asks her, how does she know what happened to Dior after that if she was burned? And it turns out that Celine is like able to split her consciousness into fragments. And one of these fragments accompanied Dior, unknown to her. And in this way, Celine, while her actual body was recovering from the attack, knew exactly where Dior was and what was happening to her, even if she wasn't communicating with her. So what was happening to Dior is that the Divok were taking her to their stronghold. So the Divok don't know that she's the Grail, but Chiara understands that there's something special about her because the Voss want her. And it's just like out of spite, really, that she took Dior. So the vampires have something called thralls, right? So these are mortals that they have bound to them by giving them at least one drop of their blood over 3 days. So once that happens, you're bound to a vampire completely and you like blindly obey any order that they give you. Even if that order is to kill yourself, you'll do it with a smile on your face. And while Dior is with the Divok, she meets a thrall of Chiara's named Joaquin Marin. So, like I said, Dior's blood has the ability to heal mortals, even if they are like an inch from death. And after an incident that occurs, she heals Joaquin. And this, like, obviously fascinates Chiara to no end. And she's more convinced of Dior's uniqueness when they also find out that her blood can burn them. So while she's with the Divok, Dior, I think, truly comes to understand what horrors vampires truly are. She thought she knew, and Gabriel always told her that she didn't, that she hadn't like seen a fraction of what he had, and that she knew nothing of the danger that was sniffing around her all the time. And I think now she really believed him and understood what he was trying to tell her, and it was a straight up gore fest, right? I thought that the first book was violent, and it was, but this one just goes like above and beyond even that. So I'm not going to go into like detail, but Dior spends a lot of time at the Divok castle, and she sees like some truly horrific things here. And like I said, Kristoff does not pull punches here. It's not for the frail of heart. So Dior gets packed into one of the wagons with the other human cattle, and she's on the road to the Divok quarters, which is housed in the city fort of Mergen, the duchy of Niam Nine Swords, right? The legendary queen and warrior who conquered and ruled an empire by age 25. I mean, wow, right? So when they arrive, Dio is taken to meet the priori of the Divok, who is Nikita, and his sister Lilith. So they're like the leaders of the Divok group. So these vampires are centuries old, right? I think like 600 years, and they're immeasurably powerful. So to add to it, Lilith has this wolf who's bound to her, and his name is Prince. So when Kiara tells him that Dio has the ability to heal mortals, Lilith calls one of her thralls named Worm, and she tells her to stab herself in the gut to have Dio demonstrate her healing abilities, right? So that's when Dio realizes Gabriel's words again. You're not sporting with the puppies anymore. You're running with the wolves. And wow. So Lilith claims Dio for herself, and she makes her drink of her blood. So remember, if she does this 3 times over 3 nights, Dio will be bound to her, and then Lilith would be able to get all of Dio's secrets out of her. So in the meantime, Dio is kept in a cell in the dungeon, but this is where she discovers the fragment of Celine that's been traveling with her, which took the form of a moth. So obviously the moth can't speak or anything, but they find a way to communicate because the moth can at least understand what Dio is saying. So Dio doesn't know that Celine dropped Gabriel off the cliff, because otherwise I don't think she would be so happy to see her. So even though the initial plan didn't work out with Master Genoa, Celine feels that it is still the work of Providence that Dio has ended up here at Dunmegan, because there's another Asani asleep here. Mother Marin, the priori of the faithful. She just has to find out where she is. So she's not dead, right? She's just asleep. So Celine explains this to Jean-Francois, and it goes like this. But it was still whispered, hoped, prayed that some remnant of Essen's bloodline might have endured. And so these 4 faithful who survived the wars of the blood made a pact. They would scatter to the corners of the realm, never more to gather in one place lest they be caught, and Ilia's dream extinguished forever. And alone, they would keep faithful vigil in the dark, looking for signs of the Redeemer's line, that hope still remained for this world, and that their dream was not truly dead. So there's 4 of them who survived, and they're now spread out across the world, I suppose, or the realm, the kingdom area, so that they will then sort of keep an ear to the ground about the Holy Grail, to ensure that the prophecy still comes to light. So there's 4 of them. Genoa, who was dead now. Wulfric, Celine's teacher, who was also dead. Oleander, who Celine says was probably very far away. And then Marin, who happens to be asleep here at Dunmegan where they are. So after a while, Dio is collected from her cell, right by Worm. And over time, they develop a kind of friendship. And she also helps Dio to put on a dress and heels for the first time ever. She looks at her. Worm met her eyes then, a touch of pity finally softening that emerald and sapphire. No purses to filch, nor watch to flee here, Mademoiselle Lachance. But though it's a strange truth, all this ludicrous beep can serve purpose. I'm not going to swear here, right? My mother listens to this podcast. Silk will prove stronger than steel on the right battleground. Beauty can be a kind of weapon and bestow a rare power, the only kind they will allow you in this place anyway. But wield it well and she will mark you. The maidservant's voice dropped low, and she can protect you from him. Him meaning Nikita, right? So because although they rule together, Nikita and Lilith are very fragile allies, and they really hate each other. They would turn on the other in a heartbeat, so to speak, because they don't actually have heartbeats. They're dead. So Lilith eventually feeds Dio her blood on 3 occasions over 3 nights, and she's satisfied that Dio is now bound to her. So you can see things have gone really bad, eh? They've gone so bad that Celine actually starts hoping that Gabriel will turn up. So yeah. So this is about halfway through the book, right? And Jean-Francois then leaves the lovely Celine to go and visit Gabriel again to continue the story about how he survived the fall. So Gabriel tells him that he was actually saved by Phoebe. The 2 of them don't get along, but she saved his life, eh? And by the time she recovered from the fight with Kiara, Dio had already gone, and when she found Gabriel, she thought to do what she could for him. So Gabriel notices that Phoebe has actually taken on more of the characteristics of the lioness that she's able to shift into, and she tells him that because of Daysdeath, her lion form is actually encroaching on her much faster than it should, and that eventually it will take over completely and she won't be able to shift into her human form anymore. So this is why she and her kind want an end to Daysdeath and to repair their blighted blood, as she calls it. So there's a lot of taunts exchanged here, like a lot. But eventually they warm up to each other. Initially, Shay more Phoebe than Gabriel, because he feels guilty about becoming close to somebody. Having lost his wife in such a horrific way. So Phoebe tells him that she too lost her loved one. Her husband was killed, and she was pregnant at the time, and the stress that his death caused meant that she lost the baby as well. So she has also suffered incredible loss, and Gabriel had so isolated himself in his grief that he'd lost his faith and he was full to bursting with his anger and his guilt. He never really stopped to think, that somebody else might be going through something similar to him. So he asks her how she can still believe and have faith, even after all that has happened to her, and she tells him, I spent my time angry at heaven. When Tori was killed, when the wolves butchered my Connor, when my sweet Kater was denied her first breath. I know what it is to spit your hate at the skies above, but I also know that there's nothing in that deed that does not make your anger worse. There's no joy to be found in embracing rage that isn't fleeing. In the end, it only deepens the darkness within, and so can only be wrong. She shrugged, meeting my eyes. Hate is poison, hope is salvation, and there's still some things in this world worth saving. That's beautiful. I need to find friends who can speak to me like that. So, so Gabriel gets attacked, and he's captured by his old apprentice Lachlan. So remember, Lachlan went to San Michon, right? So he obviously heard about what Gabriel did there. And so he hunts him down. But while he's with them, one of their party goes missing every night. And it turns out that Phoebe, it was Phoebe who completely freaked them out. It was actually quite like a funny episode. And so she saves Gabriel's life again. And he says, it was strange to think a woman I'd been raised to see as an enemy had rescued me from men I'd always thought of as friends, that this monster had become my savior. And I think that, it's okay to question the things that we're taught, right? Sometimes what once held true no longer does, and it might be time for a change in thinking. But he tells her that he was told, it matters not what we have faith in, as long as we hold faith in something. And I think Gabriel holds his faith in his friends. I don't think that I know that. And then he gets attacked by Lachlan again. Like, this guy is persistent, hey? And then this time, Gabe manages to choke out, literally, because Lachlan is choking him, that Fabian Voss killed his wife and daughter, and then Lachlan backs off. So although they make their peace with each other, Lachlan's comrade has already shot Phoebe, and she's not in a good way at all. The bullet is still inside her, and it's made of silver, and it affects her like it does the vampires. So the situation is really bad now. And Gabriel decides to take her home and see if her family can do anything to help her. And remember, the Dusk Dancers and the Silver Saints don't like each other, right? So he's taking a very big risk by doing this. So he eventually gets her to the Highlands, and he finds out that there are 3 groups of Dusk Dancers. You get the wolves, the lions, and the bears. So Phoebe gets healed by her Aunt Cinna, and now she and Gabe have to convince the Dusk Dancers to basically declare war on the Divok to get to Yor. But they don't want to, because they say that there's been a truce between them and the Divok, and they don't want to encroach on each other's territories, and that they don't really want to break that truce, because fighting with the vampires is not something they want to do. So there's a lot of resistance, but Phoebe makes this discovery that changes their minds, right? Gabriel got a hold of a vial of blood from around Kiara's neck during their first encounter, and all of the Divok seem to keep this little vial with them. And Phoebe realized that this vial contains Dusk Dancer blood. And this is what is giving the Divok their extra strength. So this it really enraged them, because then the Divok have not been respecting the truce by using Dusk Dancer blood. So now it's all out war, right? So at this point, Gabriel breaks off his story, and Jean-Francois goes back down to Celine to get her continuation. And it was a huge revelation, so spoiler alert, Celine realizes that Dior is not actually bound to Lilith. She's immune to the blood bond. And obviously it's because she's the Grail, right? So also, if she heals a thrall with her blood, it breaks the bond between the vampire and the thrall. This is huge, because it means that Worm, who was healed by Dior after she was commanded to stab herself, who is eventually revealed to be the youngest daughter of Niam Nine Swords, named Rain, who is actually the rightful lady of the lands that the Divok now inhabit. Her her bond's been broken, right, with Lilith. And Joaquin Marin, who Dior met and healed when she was captured by Kiara, is also no longer bound to their vampire masters. And they've been putting on like this extremely convincing performance since they were healed. So I don't know. I mean, Joaquin just like carried on pretending that he was thralled. I think it was to Cain or to Kiara, one of the two. But like he just carried on pretending that he was, right? So after discovering this, they go on to plan how they can break the bonds of some of the other influential thralls, like Lilith's other maids, who are actually warriors of the Nine Swords, along with their husbands and their brothers. And this actually goes pretty well for Dior and her friends, like, yay. Then Gabriel comes for Dior, yay, with an entire legion of dusk dancers, yay. Celine had mixed feelings about this, though. So Dior is a very kind girl, right, at her core, and she knows that to get to Nikita and Lilith, which Gabriel obviously wants to do, Gabriel and the Dusk Dancers are going to have to cut through thousands of thralls, many of them who are not there out of choice. And she doesn't want all of these people who didn't get a say in their fates to die needlessly, you know. So by now, Celine's body has recovered to the extent that she's made an appearance at Gabriel's war camp, and Dior asks Celine to tell Gabriel to give them 1 day, and in this time she plans to kill Nikita and Lilith Divok, because if the two of them die, the hold on their thralls will be broken. So they basically plan to kill them in their beds, because you know even vampires have to sleep sometime. No, it's not the most foolproof plan, but it's the best one they've got. So in the meantime, the Divok now need to figure out how to deal with Gabe and his army. So Nikita goes about making plans and like asking the other vampire families to ally with him. So Lilith doesn't agree with this and they argue. Lilith has never fought or been part of a war, so Nikita doesn't really have much respect for her opinion. But of course, it deepens the existing rift between them, and he feels that he needs to show her her place. And then, like, right before my eyes, everything just fell to pieces, right? Nikita commanded the now released thralls of Lilith's to pretty much kill each other. So, like, all 4 of the freed maidens and their husbands and their brothers, and of course, he knew, right? But how did he know? How did he know? It was a girl named Isla, who Dior had met at their first encounter with the Divok. She was thralled to Nikita, and even though Rain and the others had fed her Dior's blood, she chose to continue serving Nikita anyway because she was in love with him. I mean, you know. And Dior, like, remembered something that she was once told. Some join willingly, out of lust for power or darkness of heart. Others are just fools who think they'll live forever. Wow, that was quite unexpected, right? Like I had a feeling that he knew, because like his choice of people to die was just too convenient. But I didn't see it being Isla, right, who had chosen to be in his service. Like, chosen after everything that she's seen him doing. Like, I can't fathom it. Like, anyway, so the battle starts now. Since Dior's plan has been foiled, there's like kind of no point in delaying it. So Dior spends the time in the dungeons, and I could pretty much tell you like the entire ending of the book in a few sentences, right? So from the lamenting of the characters, I knew what happens to Dior, and I mean, I don't know, maybe you do as well at this point. Dior dies, right? She's killed by Lilith. They kill Lilith too, but like, wow, it was really difficult to kill her. But I had a feeling that Dior would die just because of Gabe and Celine's like demeanors and the things that they were saying. But I also knew that Dior would not remain dead, which she didn't. Like right at the end, it says her eyes opened. Now, what I'm waiting for in the 3rd book is to see if she's a vampire or not, right? I'm thinking not, because I feel like her blood should be immune to it. But then why did she wake up? Like Lilith snapped her neck, and Dior is not immortal, like as far as I know, because she hasn't died before. Maybe she has the power to resurrect. Maybe it was divine will that made her reawaken. Maybe she has to fulfill the prophecy before she's able to die. I don't know. We shall see, mon ami. I love the French in this book. It's so cute. Anyway, so there are major spoilers here, right, in this review. But it's still worthwhile to read the book because there's a lot of other little secrets that I haven't given away here. And honestly, like as I'm doing this review, I'm thinking that I might have actually enjoyed the book more than I thought. So I have to like respect Gabriel's unwavering determination to save this girl from bad fate and the lengths that he's willing to go through. And I'm wondering if he will regain his faith in God at some point. But I'm also really glad that he was able to open up to Phoebe and like to feel a bit of joy and warmth in spite of his grief. So there was a really nice thing that she told him. She was like, we're not made whole, essentially. We all made with jagged edges and broken edges, but at some point you find someone who fits your broken edges perfectly, and then they complete you. It's just such a nice thing that she said to him. So Celine's role, though, is also still a bit of a mystery to me. I don't know, maybe she's there to help find out exactly how the Grail is supposed to end Daysdeath, provided that like Dio's not a vampire. And I think she's also there just to annoy Gabriel, which she does really well. And although I don't know if he'll still want her around, honestly, after like everything that's happened. So I rated the book a 3.5 on Goodreads, right? But I think I'm going to upgrade it to like a 3.8. It's rated 4.57 on Goodreads, which is really high, hey? But my reason for not giving it a 4 is because I felt it was a filler book. And I suppose most second books are filler books before the finale, but there's not a lot of plot development in over 700 pages. And although there was character development, if you're willing to read such a long book just purely for that. So all of the plot related stuff like happened right at the end. And even then, like he kept switching points of view until I was getting irritated. And I was like, oh my word, just get to the point. I really don't feel like such a long book was warranted. And if you're going to get the physical copy, I remember I recommend getting the ebook or the audio book as well for when your arms get tired or when your stomach starts hurting from the book standing on it. So it's also not a book that you can carry around easily. But it's available everywhere, and please, it is not a children's book. At the very least, it's like young adult, and I think young adult starts at like 18 or 19. So if you don't realize that for yourself though, like after this review, then I don't know about you, hey? So if you see it like on the wrong shelf at the bookstore, please move it, because apparently this has happened, right? And parents were mortified. And Jay Kristoff uses it as a marketing technique, which is like hilarious. And I'm really looking forward to the third book though. Apparently it's going to be released sometime in 2025. And the manuscript has been returned to Jay Kristoff from the beta readers already, and he's busy making his edits. So I will also highly recommend Nevernight if you haven't read it yet. And so he hasn't given the third book the official title yet. It's obviously going to be Empire of the something. And I'm wondering like what would the title be, right? I think I would say Empire of the Grail. I don't know. Or yeah, I like that, Empire of the Grail, right? So let's see when it comes out. So yeah, this has been another episode of Books and Mortar, a very long one this time, because I mean, wow, 700 pages of a book. It's going to take a bit of time to get through it. But thanks so much for listening. And, you're the reason that I do it. So thanks so much. And this has been another episode of Books and Mortar with me, your host, Razia, where we talk about the books that build us. Until next time, bye.